Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the D Hope podcast. We're so excited to have you with us today, and I'm super excited to have our special guest with us today, Miss Macy Henson. Um, just one of the most amazing people that I've encountered in my lifetime, and just am glad to know you, Macy. Glad to know you,
Thank you.
and look forward to you sharing today with us your journey. And as you know, we here on the D Hope podcast, we share life history of people. I decided about a month ago to stop calling them stories. And call it people's life history because that's actually what it is. And you're going to be sharing with us today some of your history from your past into to where you are now. So I'm excited for those who don't know you to get to know you through this podcast, and for them to hear your history of hope and resiliency, because this is one of the most resilient stories or life histories that I know of. And so I'm so excited for you to share. So I won't prolong it any further.
Okay.
So welcome, Miss Macy
Yes.
Henson.
Thank
Yes.
you.
Welcome.
You are welcome. So tell us, so we like to start with a little background from like childhood.
Okay.
So tell us about your childhood, your family of origin, and all of that good stuff.
So, honestly, I had a great childhood. I have very little complaints about my childhood. There are some things here and there, but like I grew up in church. I grew up. My parents were together till I was probably about 12 or 13. But we grew up in church. My dad led worship. We went on Wednesdays every week. We went on Sundays every week. We went on, church trips and stuff. Like I have so many memories of just growing up in church, and that's how I was raised. So I can't say that I had any kind of like bad upbringing and or anything that should have led me down the path that I went down, but I guess that was just a choice that I made in life.
Mhm.
Um but yeah, I would say life was good until I was about 13. Around that time my mom and dad divorced. um my dad was struggling, with being a single dad, and then my mom really developed like her first taste of like alcohol at that time. So she became really bad off on alcohol very quickly. Now I know that she was an alcoholic. Now I know that she had some like codependency stuff going on. But, as a 13-year-old, I'm like, mom's jumping from man to man. She's drinking herself to sleep. She's letting me and my sister drink. And I'm 13 and my sister was, oh gosh, 10 or 11, something
Mm-hmm.
like that. This is when I'm starting to learn how to manipulate my parents against each
Mhm.
other. Because I
Get
mean,
what you want.
right, right, what kid's not going to do that?
Yeah.
And I turned into a master manipulator. Uh,
Mhm.
but yeah, so my mom started letting me drink, and that was really the start of it. Around that same time, I also had a bad experience with my neighbors. So my best girlfriend lived right next door to us at my dad's house, and she had a teenage brother. And we always used to go over and stay the night. I'd stay the night at her house, she'd stay the night at my house, and her brother would sneak in alcohol and we would drink. Well, this particular time, um, her brother had a friend over, and my friend and her brother's friend were elsewhere doing things they should not have been doing. And I was doing things that I should not have been doing with her brother. Up to a certain point until I was not comfortable anymore. And I was like, hey, you got to stop. Well, he decided he was not going to stop. So I got raped at the age of 13.
Oh.
Um, and I remember feeling really guilty about it because I grew up with this biblical knowledge, like, and I was always told that you don't have sex outside of marriage, like that is wrong. So at this point I'm thinking, oh my gosh, I'm a horrible person. and I have to go tell my mom. So I go tell my mom. It gets blown. I don't want to say way out of proportion because it needed to be blown out of proportion, but it blew up. She calls my dad. My dad is best friends with my best friend's parents. So he marches over there and it ends up being this whole thing. And it was not handled properly. I was told I wasn't allowed to see my friend anymore, and I was made out to be the bad person. And that's really where I developed this like poor sense of self. I think, I mean, I've done a lot of counseling over the years, and I think I can really track it back down to like that instance. That's when I started feeling badly about myself and thought that I was the problem and I was a bad person. And now I know that, you know, what you think about yourself is going to affect how you feel, and then how you feel is going to affect your behavior. So if I am such a bad person, then I'm just going to stop doing good things. And there was a massive switch in, I guess, my personality or just the person that I was. And I stopped the straight and narrow and veered off, you know, a completely different direction.
So with what you were saying earlier, about, you know, like you just made a choice to use, you didn't. You
Um,
didn't. Partly choice, but the background
right.
and the
I feel
feeling,
like
like you said, like you having the switch flipping and you feel bad, so you do bad things, like, because if I'm bad, then I'm gonna do, you know, what's bad. So the switch flipping is what
that's what triggered it
started.
for sure.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
start triggering the decisions that you were making. So, like, had that switch not been flipped due to that situation, you know, we might not even be sitting here today. You know.
You know what? Yeah, you're right. But you know, I like to, I don't think that God makes people go through bad things
Oh no,
at
absolutely not.
all. I don't think that
Mm-mm.
that happens. I
I
think
don't
that,
either.
but I do think that God has like intentions for me to be passionate about a certain thing, and I have to go through certain life experiences to develop those passions.
Yeah.
So while God didn't pick out that life for me because he only has great and good things
Right.
planned for me, he did turn something really bad and turn it into something that has kind of
That's
given me
been
the
it's
passion
good.
that I have now.
Yeah, which is his word.
Right.
Whatever is meant for bad, he'll turn it into good.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, I agree. I think that he doesn't welcome, like, you made the choice to veer off. But there again, like, even when we, because we're sinners, when once we veer off, we come back to him, he can turn any situation into something good.
Oh
Yeah.
yeah.
He has the power to do that. We don't.
Absolutely. Yeah. But go ahead, continue.
Um, forgot what I was gonna say. So yeah, up until that point, I was playing violin, and I still do now, but I started,
Uh-huh.
you know, around the age of 6 and was excelling. I was going to a magnet school playing music. Um, I was like on track to go to college for music, making
That's
straight
cool.
A's. I mean, I was a straight and narrow kid, and then after that, the switch flipped,
Yeah.
and I that was right around the time I'm going into high school. So I'm already going through this identity crisis. And now I've experienced this other thing that is further just messing up who I am and who I
Yeah.
believe that I am. Um, and I believe all it takes is getting into the wrong crowd, which is exactly what I did. I didn't have the assertiveness to, you know, stand up for the beliefs that I was raised in at that time. I mean, I was just
You're
vulnerable.
curious.
Hmm.
I was vulnerable and curious and just veered off. So now my entire high school life was just marijuana and alcohol. Nothing more than that throughout high school, but like I'm sneaking out, drinking all the time. I'm putting myself in risky situations. I'm smoking weed. And a lot of these situations my mom let me do. So I mean, I was 16 and she's letting me date a 21-year-old. I would never in my life let my child do that. But her judgment was messed
Was
up at the
scared.
time too.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, so that was high school. I would say I had no respect for myself because I had a low self-worth, and that just led me to jump around from guy to guy too, just throughout high school. And then I met my future son's dad. I would say at about, I was 16 or 17. And right from the beginning, like if I could have like the wisdom that I have now, I would never have ventured down that road. Um, but I did. And like, let's go to our first date. He showed up into my driveway with this blacked out like Cadillac. It had like horns on the dash and like fuzzy dice hanging from the mirror. He had like an 8-ball shifter. And I'm like, oh my gosh, Daddy, this guy is so cool. And he didn't even get out of the car. He blew his horn for me. And my dad looked at me and said, you better not go out that door. And I went out the door. And you know what? Wouldn't you know it? I decided that I had fallen in love.
Yeah. It was the dice.
It was, yeah, and the black horns.
Yeah.
And he ended up being I don't want to say the worst decision because I meet worse men in my life since then, but a very bad decision. I spent the next 7 years, and what little self-worth I did have, he completely destroyed. He was very narcissistic and gaslighting, and I mean, to the point he would like cheat on me and then make me somehow believe it was my fault that he cheated on me, breaking up with me, bringing me back in. And it was just a constant, like, and I'm chasing after this guy like he's the best thing on earth. And he's just feeding into it. So, I mean, by the time that relationship was over, I had crippling anxiety on top of it.
Yeah.
But still no other drugs, just alcohol and weed. In 2012, we had our son, and I thought for sure that my son was going to fix everything. But now that just kind of like put a magnifying glass on all the areas that he was falling short. Our son had jaundice coming home from the hospital, and instead of being home with us to make sure he was okay, he was at a strip club. So when I started freaking out about my son 3 days in because there was something wrong, I didn't have him to drive me to the hospital. I had to call my father, who was working overnight, to drive home and come take me to the hospital, me and my newborn baby. But even that wasn't like.
How old were you at that time?
I was 21 when I had my son, and I didn't end up leaving him until I was 23. So my son was 2. And you know, back and forth, he wasn't working, he wasn't providing, I lost so many jobs because I would go to work, and he didn't want to watch our kid, but he didn't want to work either. And the couple of times that I would leave our kid at home with him, I would have this horrible like gut feeling like, what if he didn't wake up? And I would leave work and drive home, and he would still be sleeping, and my son would still be sitting in the same high chair that I had placed him in at 7 o'clock that morning. So it was, eventually I got fed up, and I did like leave for good. And this is kind of where my story kind of like jumps and I go off the deep end.
Yeah.
Because at this point now, I have anxiety, I have no self-worth. I feel like the worst person ever. He's convinced me now that I am fat and ugly and nobody is ever going to love me. And so I'm willing to accept, you know, anybody that is going to give me love and attention. I mean, even just a smidge more than what he gave me. Which led me to meet my daughter's father, Chris. And you know what? He adored me. He hit all of those checklists that I thought that I needed hit. And I was willing to overlook every single red flag that got waved in my face. And I did. I think I found out maybe 2 or 3 weeks into us dating that he was snorting pills. And maybe about another 2 weeks later, I found out he wasn't actually snorting them. He was shooting them up. But the look of relief that he had on his face after he did it, that's what like drew me in. I'm like dying inside. I am hurting all the time. I'm tired of being anxious and depressed. Like I don't like myself at all at this point. Let me have some of what you're having. And that's all it took. I I was hooked after the first time I shot it up.
Yeah.
And of course I knew nothing. I knew nothing about drugs. I didn't know that there were withdrawals. I didn't know that you get sick. I mean, I didn't even know enough about that type of stuff to know that I was going to get addicted. I had no idea. I didn't know that I was supposed to be not sharing needles with another person.
What
Like,
was your sorry to interrupt, but what was your alcohol and like marijuana? Was that something that you had stopped, or was that something that you were still kind of like using to cope, or what was that like in your life?
I would say that I don't know that I necessarily thought that I was using it to cope, but I was, because it wasn't like passive recreational use. Like
Okay.
anytime that I was using these things, I was using them until I like passed
Excessively.
out or was
Yeah.
sick or something. Like there was no switch that I could flip off. Like I'm just going to go until I can't go anymore.
Yeah.
But I wouldn't do it all the time.
Right. That's where it gets
So
tricky.
so it's okay, right? Because I didn't do it all the time. I mean that's what I told myself.
Yes.
Yeah.
But yeah, but I mean that was on and off.
Okay.
So
I was just curious to know, like, were you like abstinent? Were you like totally abstaining, and then all of a sudden, like, you saw that and was just like, oh, did you already have like that kind of like,
I
well, you
think
already said that kind of that shift already happened. So,
Mhm.
yeah, and I think I always had addictive traits. I think I still have addictive traits. I think I can still be predisposed to do things and let them get out of control if I don't pay attention to them.
yeah.
I take very seriously everything that I learned at the Foundry because I still use those things to this
Hmm.
day if I feel myself starting to get more anxious or starting to not do the things that I'm supposed to be
Yeah.
doing.
Me too.
So I think that those are like things that I'm already like, those are just part of my personality.
Yeah.
But I didn't know to look out for them then. Um, so yeah, back to whenever I did that. I started doing it every day and I'm chasing this high now because I don't feel anything. I don't feel great, but I don't feel bad. And that was nice. And for a really long time, it was fun. I have no complaints about that
Hmm.
small portion of my life. Um, and I very small portion. It only took a couple of months before like I could not turn back. And I remember it vividly. My daughter's father, we hadn't had her yet. Obviously, we had just started dating, but he was a painter, so he would leave very early in the morning. He'd be gone all day, and I'm at this point where I'm not working. I'm just laying in the bed all day waiting for him to come home and bring me more pills. And we were just doing like pain pills, like just opiate pain pills. That was it. And one morning I woke up and I was so unbelievably sick. Like my stomach is cramping, I'm hunched over, I'm throwing up, I'm sweating, I can't think straight. And I call him and tell him that I think I have the flu. And he starts just apologizing to me. And like, like he wasn't like it was his fault. And I'm like, dude, what are you talking about? I'm sick. Can you just come home and bring me some medicine? And he just kept, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. Well, he comes home and gives me a pill and it immediately goes away.
Hmm.
And that is how I found out that what withdrawals were. I had
Was
no
what?
idea. And that sickness, the only thing that I can compare, like there's nothing that you can think about other than not feeling that.
Hmm.
So at that point, like I just convinced myself that this was just life and I'm just going to keep doing drugs. And now I'm not chasing a high, I'm escaping this withdrawal pain. Um, and I found myself willing to do more and more things that I normally would never have done to get rid of that withdrawal. Um, so, I had my son over there and he would sleep over with us at this guy's house. And I found myself pawning my son off on people and being gone for days at a time. Um, I wasn't taking the best care of him at the time. And then I found myself calling my family and asking them for money all the time. I found myself starting to get angrier when they said no. And they didn't really start saying no for a very long time. I started breaking in to my granny's house and taking anything of value in her garage. Same for my dad. My mom caught on real quick and she shut it down. I didn't even call her. I knew I wasn't going to get through to her. And during this time, she was in a period of sobriety. She had had several years of alcohol free. Like she was doing good. But yeah, I stole
Yeah.
everything. I pawned my violin, which this violin was a replica of a Stradivarius. It was supposed to take me to college. It was
Yeah.
very expensive, and I pawned it for $200.
Oh gosh.
That was
Mm-hmm.
it. And it's gone to this day. Like I've tried to go back and get it. I can't track it. I don't know where it's at, but that's besides the point. That's something that I would have never done.
Yeah.
Not on drugs. I was never a thief. Me and my family were always really close. I would have never done that. I broke into my grandmother's house and stole her deceased husband's wedding band and pawned it. Like I would have never ever done that. My grandmother caught me breaking into her house through a doggy door one time. I would
Oh
break it
gosh,
in.
could you imagine what that looked like?
She beat me within an inch of my life with a broom.
Yeah.
We laugh about it now,
Now,
Yeah, I'm
yeah.
but
sure.
it
But
was
she was
not
like,
funny
what are
then.
you doing?
What are you
Yeah.
doing? Getting a
Yeah.
fly of water.
Yeah.
So
So tell us, Macy, like going back to Chris, how your relationship with him was, because it was a bit of an addiction as well.
he was great. And I had like zero complaints. He made me feel good. And so I was chasing that relationship with him for the longest time because he made me feel good. Um, but I mean, that eventually turned bad too. I mean, at some point the drugs got worse and that relationship was not good. And we are going to get to that whenever it starts turning really
Yeah.
bad.
Okay.
But for the longest time, I had convinced myself that he was the greatest thing ever. And now we're going to get married. And during this time, my son went to go stay with my sister in a different state. I was running free, didn't have to have any responsibility now. And I just like started dwindling away. Not too terribly yet, but you could tell there was something wrong. We ended up living in a camper outside of my dad's house for a while. We ended up living in an abandoned trailer. Then we ended up living in a hotel. While we were in the hotel, my aunt flew down from Alabama and interventioned me. Like she invited me to breakfast with my dad, and I'm like, oh well, this is nice, and I should have known better. But they like locked me in the car and interventioned me, would not take me home, and took me straight to an intensive outpatient and got me on Suboxone, which was great. It provided me the ability to get off of the pills once I, calmed down and was not mad at them anymore. It let me get my kid back. And then during that time, we were able to build up our life and get a trailer. During that time, we were not doing any drugs. I was sharing my Suboxone with him. Now I was selling my Suboxone, so I'm still like in the street. I'm still meeting with drug dealers. Like I'm still not living the life that I should, but it wasn't as bad as it was. So that's what I'd convinced myself. During that time, I got pregnant, and we had our daughter Abigail. That was in 2016. During that time, everything was good. My aunt gave me a car. Everybody thought that life was turning around. And it was up until after I had my daughter. They gave me hydrocodone in the hospital coming home after I had her. And I took that prescription, and then immediately I was like, let's go get some pain pills. And then that was it. We started doing more pain pills. Ran out of money. We were in a very bad part of town, which I had no idea everything that was going on that side of town at that time. I found out very quickly. Just walking to the store, someone drove up beside me and said, hey, this is better than pills. Why don't you try this? And I bought my first bag of heroin. And then from that point on, it was heroin. Nothing was going to touch that high after that. And I would say from that point until my daughter was 6 months, like that was the time that I had left, like living in the home with everybody. Because very quickly, like we lost everything. DCF got called several times just to check up on us. I thought that I was always able to get away with it. and like hide that I was using drugs. It was very obvious now that like
Yeah.
being on the other side. But yeah, just I mean, looking back, like I had my daughter in a playpen next to my dresser, and on the dresser I have needles like riddled on the dresser. Like
Mhm.
those what who puts their baby next to that? I mean, there are several things that I did. I mean, I'm smoking in the car with my children. I'm smoking in the house with them. I'm shooting up in the car and then driving with them in the car. Like these are all things that I just didn't think anything different of. Um, when my daughter was about 6 months old, and this is where, the turning point where they get taken. Um, we were sitting in the car and I'm smoking a cigarette and my daughter has a lollipop. And I think Donna, I think you know this story, but she turned the lollipop backwards and stuck the stick in her mouth and choked. And I couldn't see the lollipop because it was in her hand. So when she pulled the stick out and she's choking, I thought it had come off and gotten lodged in her throat. So I freak out. I turn around and I'm swiping my finger down her throat. Well, when I did that, my other hand, the cherry of my cigarette hit the top of the car and it fell behind her in her car seat. So she's screaming and crying. I have no idea that the cherry fell behind her in the car seat because I'm thinking she's screaming and crying because she's choking and I just
Shit.
shoved my finger down her throat. So she leaned up against that cigarette until it went out for the whole car ride home. I didn't notice that she had been burned until I got home and went to go change her. And at that point, like it was bad. And at this point, I'm like, what do I do? Like, I can't take her to the hospital. They're going to take her. They're going to know, like, there's going to be a report. They're going to drug test me. So I just didn't even take her. I think I put Neosporin on it. And this was a bad burn. Like, I should have taken her to the hospital. But the next day when I was dope sick, I woke up and was like, I can't take care of these kids. And my family was paying for daycare for them because they wanted them out of the house as much as possible so that they could be taken care of during the day. So I took them to daycare and then never got them back, um, you know, for a very long time. Um,
So the next day, you dropped them off, and you didn't see them for how long?
oh gosh,
Gosh.
Abigail, the little girl, I didn't see her again until I went to the Foundry.
Mm-hmm.
Oh
And
my gosh.
yeah, that was a long
It
time.
was a long time. Yeah.
Oh
Yeah.
my gosh.
My dad ended up taking her, my dad and my stepmom, and they raised her. And that was so hard for my dad because he wanted me to be happy, but he also
Yeah.
had to make sure that she was okay. And so he would not let me see her.
Yeah.
I think
So
I'm
the
pretty,
daycare wound up
The
calling.
yep,
daycare called.
yep. And then DCF was called. When they drug tested me that time, I failed, and they told me I had to go to rehab if I wanted to see them again. And so I did. I went to my first inpatient rehab the next, probably like a week later. And I stayed 3 days. And when I got out of that rehab, we no longer had a car or a house or anything, and I was homeless.
One did you said you stayed 3 days?
Hmm.
You just was like, I don't care anymore. I'm dope sick. I'm leaving, or
You know what? I wasn't even dope sick. They had given me Suboxone as soon as I went in. I wasn't sick
you
anymore.
just was just not having. I mean, I get it. I've done the same thing. You're just not having it. You're
Well,
just
what it
like, I'm
really
ready
was
to
is I knew
go.
I knew we were losing the house. I knew we were losing the car. I was worried about Chris. He was homeless. I didn't think that he had the ability to take care of himself, and he was out there doing it by himself. So I couldn't get myself to stay in this facility where I was getting fed and had a hot shower and had a bed and all of these things while he was out there. And I could not get myself to sit still. I had to leave.
Yeah.
I mean,
See,
at least
that's
I
why I
thought I
was
did.
saying she had an addiction to Chris
Yeah.
too. Like
I
on
I
top of,
I
yeah.
still am in awe that I was able to cut that off at the Foundry because it took a long time at the Foundry before I finally like cut that part of my
And
life
he
off.
wasn't necessarily abusive to you. Y'all were toxic because of the substances you were using.
He did end up being abusive.
Oh, he did. Oh, okay.
Yeah. Towards I skipped over that, but towards the end of our housing situation, he hit my kneecap with a hammer. He choked me with a tow rope. He threw a rocking chair at me. He stabbed holes through my doors. Like he
Okay.
ended up being crazy, but I think it
Yeah.
was from like, but he was never like that before heroin. Like the only thing that I can relate it to is the drugs, because I know drugs make people turn into things that they're not,
Yeah, they
Right.
do.
but it still doesn't make it okay.
Right.
He was not a safe person, but I wasn't. I couldn't overlook that. Like I had to have him. I had to be there with him. So that's why I left rehab the first time. And I did go through withdrawals there. I had to go like a certain amount of hours before they would give me Suboxone. So I had withdrawn. And I wouldn't even say that I was at my worst usage at that point yet. So like there's so many times when I could have turned around. I could
Yeah.
have stopped and it would have never gotten as bad as it did. But I didn't.
Yeah.
So anyway, I left that time, went back out. At this point I'm homeless. But I will say that when I finally, like, I found him, we reconnected, we walked by this place. It was called Hands and Feet. It was a ministry on that area that we were homeless at, and they had given us a tent. And they fed the homeless and they did a Bible study out there. And I met them. They got us into a shelter downtown, which we ended up getting kicked out of for using drugs at the shelter. And then we ended up in a tent in the woods. I tried going back to that rehab another time, the same one. I stayed one day and left again. And it's crazy because my dad had to pay like a copay of like $2,000 just for me to get in. And he paid it and I stayed for one day. Like I would be so mad at me
Yeah.
if I was my
understand.
dad. But I mean, that's just another one of the ways that I destroyed all of those bridges. Like my dad was the last one. Everybody, I would call them and ask for money. I would ask for clothes, ask for a ride, ask for somewhere to stay, and they would keep doing it. And I knew that if I kept calling my dad, he would always do it because I was this little girl and I was a daddy's girl. And I just tore at his heartstrings. And when I finally called him, he was like, you know what? No, like I can't watch you kill yourself anymore. And he didn't take my phone calls anymore after that. And I stopped talking to them. So yeah, we ended up homeless in a tent, living back like in the woods by this creek area, trying to figure out how we're going to get rid of this dope sickness now. And Chris decides that he's going to prostitute me out now. So this is my daughter's dad, who I absolutely adore and love, that now wants me to start sleeping with men to feed both of our addictions. And I've got nothing left. I'm broken now. Like my kids are taken, like, and we passed right over that, but like that tore me in half.
Oh, I'm
Like
sure.
when they
I
took my
know.
children, that is one of the only times that I remember letting out a blood curdling scream, like of despair. Like, and that's the only thing that I can really explain it as. Like it tore me apart, and I
Yeah.
have nothing now. So I didn't care anymore. So now I'm going from heroin, and now I'm smoking crack. I'm shooting up crack, and I'm sharing needles with people. I'm having sex with people. I'm not using protection. And this is just a whole nother part, because God has spared me from so much that I have just, I should be way worse off than I am.
Yeah.
But that lasted from 2017 until 2018, actually. 2016 to 2018, right there. So it was no more than 2 years. But within that 2 years, I'm normally like 160 pounds, and I dropped down to 90.
Well, that's the
Um,
picture then. That
yeah,
first.
that's the picture that I sent you.
That one.
Yeah, because
Yeah.
I'm.
I
Yeah.
don't know if you can see it. Yeah. It's got a glare, but yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. It's just, yeah, you're just wasting away in that picture.
Yeah. And yeah, that was like day in, day out. I would just go sleep with people, get our drugs, and that's what we did every day. I mean, I can't even say we. That's what I did.
That's what you did. Yes.
And I was just bringing it back to him, and he was just getting progressively worse. I mean, he's beating me in the woods now and just leaving me. Like, it's just getting worse. I'm trying to think, like, I overdosed a couple of times in those years. Some of them, like, I don't know. I mean, I know how I'm alive. Like, we know how I'm alive,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
like, there's no medical way that I should be alive because no one got to me like within an amount of time to restart my heart as to make me be okay. Does that make sense? I don't know if I'm
Yeah.
Yes.
right.
Yeah.
Um, but that happened a couple of times, and this kind of is where I talk about that nurse a little bit because you know, I used to get these abscesses all over my arms. I'm using dirty needles. I'm sharing needles with people. I'm outside. I'm not clean, so I'm getting abscesses all the time, and my arms are like you. I still have like scars and stuff on
Scars.
my arms and on my neck. But every time I would go to this one hospital, and there was this nurse that was always there, and he was so kind.
Aw.
He would just sit in there and he would take care of me. And, you know, sometimes I'd have abscesses on both arms, so they can't even tie off my arm to give me an IV. Um, or I've destroyed all of my veins, so they can't even get an IV in. So, I mean, he would just be sitting there holding my hand and I'm crying. One of the times I overdosed, I woke up and he was holding my hand. Um,
Aw.
and I'll circle back to
Yeah.
around to him in a minute. But anyway, it just kept getting worse. And I'm going to go to the day, I'm going to skip ahead now. I'm going to go to the day that I, you know, was my end point. Um, but I had just gotten into another car, and I remember sitting down and then just getting like this. It's probably 2 o'clock in the morning. I got in this guy's car. He picks me up on the side of the road, and I shut the door, and I immediately get this like feeling inside, and I'm like, you need to get out of this car. And I was like, hey, never mind. I've got to go. And I reach for the door, and there's no handle. This guy has taken the door handle out of his car. So I'm stuck. So he proceeds to drive me to the middle of nowhere, tortures, rapes, beats, like, and just leaves me there. And
What?
without like getting too gruesome about it, but that's what happened. And I walk back to the tent. I'm done at this point. Like, nobody stops and helps me. People are passing me. I'm covered in blood. No one helps me. I get back to the tent and I'm crying and sobbing, and Chris looks at me and goes, "Well, you just did all the drugs. You just did them yourself." And he knocks me out and leaves me in the middle of the woods. And this was April 1st of 2018, which is coincidental because that day is also Easter Sunday.
Okay.
So anyway, I'm fed up at this point. I don't want to live anymore. So I go off and get in someone else's car. I clean myself up, go get in someone else's car, and I go and get enough heroin and crack to mix together to just take my life. I'm done. And it still gives me goosebumps. But
Me
so
too.
so I did. I put it all in this needle, and I put it in my arm. And when I did, it broke off, and everything that was in the syringe fell out into the sand. And I just lose it. I had what I call a crack attack and screamed and screamed and screamed until I had like no vocal cords left. Like, I couldn't talk anymore. And I remember God telling me that if I stopped, like if I stopped trying, he couldn't help me. And like, it was an audible voice. Like,
Oh
it
my
wasn't like I heard this voice in my head. Like, I heard it. And he told me to get up, go down the street, and go back to that Hands and Feast place that had given me the tent. And they used to feed into the Bible studies. And we had been going back and forth there eating food over the last 2 years. But so I did. I got up, I walked down there, and they were waiting at like on the sidewalk for me. It was the weirdest thing. And they dropped everything they were doing and drove me to the hospital, where we didn't go to the same hospital that I normally go to. We went to a different hospital, but that nurse happened to be at the other hospital, the new one. Like, he just was filling in for a day there. And he wasn't even my nurse, but he saw my name on the screen and ran in to come see me and make sure I was okay. And I told him I was going to rehab. And it was just the coolest thing that he just happened to be there. I called it a sign.
Yeah.
So anyway, I went from a couple different hospitals because they were trying their hardest to get me into a detox facility. And sometimes you have to go through the hospital to do that. But they got me into the government funded detox facility down here. They called my family. Turns out my family had been bringing food to Hands and Feet and feeding the homeless because they didn't want to feed me directly, but they still wanted to feel like they were helping. So they had been with Hands and Feet, which I didn't even know that they knew them, and had been feeding me through them, kind of. So they already had their phone number.
Oh.
They called them, and I was only in the detox facility for like 4 days. Within that 4 days, they got a hold of my aunt who lives in Bessemer, or she lived in Birmingham at the time, and got me into the Foundry. So it kind of, you know what? I did see my daughter that day when they picked me up from detox. They drove me to my dad's house. And I saw my daughter, which she had no idea who I was, but I saw her, and then my dad immediately drove me up to Birmingham. And then the next day I was at the Foundry. And that really started like all the hard work, I would say then.
Wow.
But and that's where I met Miss Donna.
Yeah.
Miss Donna had to put up with a lot.
Yeah. I love Miss Donna though. God's equipped her to do that.
Yeah,
he had us there at the same time for a reason.
So this was
100% believe
2000
that.
and
this was the last time I ever used drugs was April 1st, 2018. I got to the Foundry on April. I have my badge right here. My old badge.
But you got it. Yeah.
I have it hanging up on my degrees.
that's
I love it.
April 7th, I think, was when I went to the Foundry. And I said I grew up in church, but I don't think that I don't think I ever was saved. I think I truly got saved when I went to the Foundry and came like face to face with everything that I had done. When the drugs finally lifted off, it was, the weight that was on me was horrible. Like it was heavy, and I didn't have anything masking it. I laid in my bed and cried for days. Thank God for Miss Donna, because I couldn't have done that on my own. But I ended up going down and getting saved there, got baptized, and gosh, my life has been nothing but good since then. I have no complaints. I have bad days sometimes, but like I have no complaints.
Yeah.
It's been like a whole 180.
Absolutely. I can attest to it being a 180 from I don't think I'll ever forget the day that I know that at least I think there were a couple of times where the light bulb went off for you, but I just remember one day asking you a question that I wouldn't have known to ask you on my own. I know it was purely Holy Spirit led. We were talking, and when she said she had no self-worth, she had none. To the point of where she didn't even want to be in a room by herself. Like it was uncomfortable for her to be with herself. And I think I know we were having a conversation on the lines of that or something, and I can't remember exactly how I asked or what I asked, but it had something to do with.
Oh, I remember. I have it written down.
What did she say?
She said, "What is so wrong with you that you can't stand, or what do you think is so wrong with you that you can't stand to be alone with you?"
Yeah, that was yeah. And I was like I wouldn't have known to ask that.
It didn't immediately like click with me, but I wrote it down, and like I just like thought on it over the night. And I don't know what it was about that question, but like it switched something, and I'm like, there's nothing wrong with me. And that's when I started like doing all of the Genesis work, all the work, and started replacing like all of these negative thoughts. That's when I started realizing like, why do I think so badly about myself?
Yeah.
And I started replacing them with things that were true. And, in the Foundry, we use Bible verses to replace these negative thoughts with truth, because God's truth is always truth. Like it's never going to change. So, that's really the problem. I fully attribute my change of life to replacing these negative thoughts about myself with God's scripture. And I wrote them on note cards. I meditated over them. I read them. I would repeat them and write them. And I just didn't stop doing that until I felt better.
And that's really, that's when I saw the, like, that next time we met, she was a completely different person. Like,
remember, I started
and it was just a
Bible.
week in week in between.
I
Like,
started reading my Bible and went through the whole New Testament, writing out every single question that I had, verse by verse, and I would send them to my dad to answer them. And that kind of was what prompted me and my family to start talking again. My dad answered that letter and started answering all my questions.
Oh, that's beautiful.
Yeah. But I mean, I still had bad days at the Foundry. When I was at the Foundry, I found out that my daughter had been adopted. So like, I found out that I wasn't going to get to be her mom anymore. So like, I had bad days, but I mean, there were several days that I showed up into Donna's office and said I wanted to go home.
Yeah.
Or I think I even packed my bags at one point. And she looked at me and she said, "What are you going to fix by going home? Are you going to get her back?"
Like, what's gonna happen? Like, what are you gonna? What's gonna happen?
Doing things my way had gotten me like further and further into this hole. And she told me that those feelings would pass and I would stop being so upset, and I did. And I just had to learn to stop being irrational.
Yeah, I think that's one thing that's so great about inpatient, like long-term inpatient, is that you're able to sit with those uncomfortable feelings, those negative thoughts, and like they will pass. But like when you're first getting sober, you're so used to escaping and numbing out. So sitting with that can be painful. But it gets easier with time. And so doing that there allows us, when we get out, when life's not always good, to know that, hey, I can get through this. This is a feeling. It's going to pass. And you know that you don't have to like self-sabotage just because you're having a bad day, because that's what we used to do.
I just knew that if I went back out, I wasn't going to live anymore. Like, I was on death's doorstep. So, I mean, and I just, once I calmed down and wasn't so upset anymore, I'm like, what is out there for me? Like, I'm not going to get I'm wanting to leave because they took my kids away, but I'm not going to get them back by leaving. I might actually have a chance of seeing them though, if I stay. And so I stayed, and I called my old caseworker and I was like, "Listen, I know you closed the case, but what were all the things that I needed to get done to get my kids back? Like, you haven't taken my son. My son was with his dad at the time. So I'm like, I want to try, if I can't get my daughter back, I'm going to focus on him now." And I found parenting classes in Birmingham that I was allowed to go to. My other thing was I had to complete a program. So I had to complete the Foundry. There were several other things that I had to do. I don't remember what they were, but I had a list and I'm checking them off. I'm keeping a phone log of every time I'm talking to my son on the phone. I'm doing all the things that I'm supposed to be doing. And they started bringing my son up to see me. I finally talked to his dad, and his dad was not nice throughout this whole situation. He was terrible, and he was abusing our son the whole time, which was so hard for me to stay. Like, I knew that my son was being abused. He wasn't being taken care of. My family was calling DCF. The DCF wasn't doing anything. And I knew my son was stuck in this horrible position, but I couldn't leave and get him back because they weren't going to give him back to me if I didn't finish the program. So I was having to sit and just know that God was taking care of this, and I couldn't do anything. And it made it so hard because I just wanted to leave. I felt like I was okay. Like, I've been clean for 4 months. I'm fine.
I'm good now, God. Let me go.
And she was in a year-long program.
Yeah. Like, and wouldn't you know, he made me sit in Alabama for another year after that before I could ever go home. And it wasn't like he told me, it wasn't like he made it to where I couldn't go. I could have very well packed up my stuff and gone, but I was listening and I knew he was telling me to wait. And I'm so glad that I did, because I don't think things could have turned out better than they have now, just by me like being patient and waiting. I started getting weekend passes home to go stay with my aunt, and my son's dad would, every week leading up, he'd be like, well, I don't know if I'm going to send him. And he would just keep me on edge, and he wouldn't give me a definite answer, but then he would send him. I mean, these are the narcissistic things that he would do. But he would send him. And so he would come and stay with me for a weekend every, I think, month and a half, 2 months, something like that. And so I started building that relationship with him. He was 6 at that time. He very much knew something with him. Like, he remembered it all. He remembered me being abused. He remembered me leaving. Like he even asked me, like, why did you leave me? Like, there's some hard conversations that I had to have with him. But I was rebuilding that relationship, and just, I mean, great things were happening. And then I graduated from the Foundry, so I stayed the whole year. Actually, it was 9 months, and then I went to live with my aunt in Birmingham and did like the color line and all of that. I got a job. I still have the same job that I had there. So I got a job at Longhorn. And so I ended up transferring to Longhorn down here. So I've been with the same company now for 6 years. But I'm living with my aunt. She ended up giving me a car again. Just the forgiveness that my family has shown me. It's not even like forgiveness, but I'm just going to hold on to it. They have completely, like, they wouldn't bring it up if I didn't.
That's awesome.
They let it go.
That's beautiful.
And I think a lot of how people get clean is themselves, but if you have a good family behind you, it makes it so much easier. There are plenty of girls at the Foundry that I watched struggle because they did not have family to help them. And had I not had my family, it would have been a lot harder to get to where I am now. So anyway, she didn't give me the car, but she let me drive it, and she bought herself a new one. It was her car. And I lived with her, and I worked, and I saved money. And I was going to go down to Florida to visit. And wouldn't you know, the week that I'm about to go, I find out I have a felony warrant for Florida. And it was for child abuse, for the burn to my daughter that had happened several years before. Apparently, it had just gone through. And I'm like,
did you ever go to jail?
Nope. I had never been to jail that entire time.
Really?
Never got arrested for drug charges, prostitution, nothing. So anyway, I find out I have a warrant, and I'm like, God, like, I just went to rehab for a year. Are you really going to make me, like, go to jail now? Like, I'm going to go to prison now? And my mom's an attorney, and she started calling people. And she found, I guess there was a detective at the same time that was calling because one of the times that I had been raped, I filed a police report, and they had gotten DNA. Nothing was ever done. Well, apparently this detective was following a serial rapist and killer that had been found in a prison, arrested for something completely different that matched the DNA to the man that had raped me and attacked me. And I think I had skipped completely over this, but this is another one of those really big stories. There's so many. But one of the times that I had been raped, this guy was actually, like, choking me, was killing me. It's the same one. And right when I was about to black out, the cops showed up, and he took off. Well, apparently when he took off, he wrecked his car. Blood got on the steering wheel. That's how they got his DNA. And he ended up raping and killing several more women. Ended up going to jail for something else, and they matched the DNA. And so they were trying to get a hold of me to pick him out of a lineup to testify. And my mom was like, sure, she'd be happy to, but you have to drop these charges. And they agreed to. She's like, she went to rehab. She's fine. Like, her daughter's fine. Let's drop it. She's got her life back together, but she'll come and pick him out. And so the detective signed something. They agreed. I went down to Florida. I picked him out of a lineup, and they dropped all my charges. So,
man,
that was another huge thing. So now I can go to Florida. So for the next, everything in me wanted to come back to Florida. I wanted to be around my kids. I wanted to be here. But I was really listening at this point in my life to God, and he just kept telling me to be patient. So I stayed in Alabama for another year, from the end of 2018 all the way to beginning of 2020, and just worked and saved my money. I would drive down to Florida for a weekend every month and go see my kids. And that's
Were
when
you seeing your daughter at the time or no?
they started letting me see her too. Yes. So I was able to start seeing her. I had to start building a relationship with my stepmom who had adopted her because, she didn't even know me. And this is her daughter. She's raised this baby from 6 months on. That's her kid now. And me and her, we have a great relationship. Like
Oh, that's awesome.
I've crossed some boundaries. She's put me in my place. I don't cross them anymore. And we have a great relationship. They've told her that I'm Abigail's mom. They've told Abigail. So she knows that I'm her birth mom now. I don't really give her as much details as I do to Jamie because he remembers it. But if she asks questions about anything, if it's not too much information, I tell her. I mean, she was just over here last night for dinner. We go to church together every Sunday. One of the pictures that I sent you was her and my son together. That was on her birthday.
Yeah.
My dad and stepmom said, "Hey, why don't you come pick her up for her birthday and spend the day with her?" And that was the first time I ever got to do that. That was fun.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's just been a slow rebuilding process. Just to like quickly go through some of the things that have happened. I got full custody of my son, back from his father. He ended up, splitting time with me, but then he just fell off the face of the earth, and stopped seeing him. So I got an attorney and started fighting and proving that he didn't want to be around. And so they ended up giving me full custody and putting him on child support, which he never paid. I ended up meeting my now husband, who is amazing in every way. I mean, sent straight from God, like had to
Yeah.
have been. Like he was very involved in his church. We met online on Tinder. It was the only person that had a Bible verse on their thing, and I'm like, I'm gonna look at you. And I friend zoned him for like 2 years. Like I was like, really, God, like this guy is really annoying. Are you sure? Like this is the guy? And
Hey, before you tell more about your husband, if you don't mind talking a little bit about that transitional period and a fella who came into play and your experience with, like, I knew I shouldn't have,
I know what
had,
you're talking about.
yeah.
So yeah, okay. So this was while I was still living in Alabama. So this was before I ever moved back to Jacksonville. I met this guy. What was his name? He
I
had gone to the
want to,
Foundry too.
yeah.
He went there.
Yeah,
Uh-huh.
he was, but at a different time. Like he had
Time,
been out for
yes.
a while. And I didn't even know that he went to the Foundry. I had met him elsewhere and then found out he went to the Foundry. He was a previous Foundry graduate. So yeah, we started dating for a little bit and he started acting weird, like being up all hours of the night, like complete switch. And I went to go visit him one time and he puts a crack rock in my hand. And at this point,
What?
I was almost a year clean at
Mm-hmm.
this point. And he put a crack rock in my hand and a crack pipe. And I looked at it and my immediate was like, oh my God, like I haven't seen this in a year.
Yeah.
And I got to the point of melting it in the crack pipe and putting it to my mouth before God was like, what are you doing? And it was like a oh my God, what am I doing? And I threw it all out the window.
Because it
And
was like an automatic response to,
Response.
yeah,
oh, I know
Mm-hmm.
what to do with
I
this.
almost, I almost, my aunt was sitting at the table when I got home with a drug test. Like she would have shipped me right back off to rehab without questions. Like she was over me.
Mm-hmm.
Like
Yeah.
she was not playing anymore. But yeah, I almost messed up everything. And just by having it now, you could put a cracked rock in my hand now and I would not even second guess it. I would
Yeah, but
not.
that was very early on in
Yeah, very
sobriety.
early on.
Yeah, it
Yeah.
was crazy. He ended up dying a few months later.
Mm-hmm.
Did he?
Um,
He
oh
did.
Oh, that's
yeah,
Mm-hmm.
terrible.
yeah,
He
he ended up
did.
overdosing and dying. Same thing with my daughter's dad. He ended up overdosing and dying.
Did he?
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
I cut off all communication. I knew that if I tried to reach out to him that, I would go right back to him. I mean, maybe like for the first year. Like after that, I feel like I had reached a point where it didn't matter to me
Yeah.
anymore. But he ended up passing away and dying too from an overdose.
Yeah. So,
Oh,
like, one thing that I, like I can say too, like about Macy, like even after, like, because there's, you know, I say this to people coming in, going, hey, call if you have something going on, like, and
Mm-hmm.
preferably I'd prefer if you call
Before.
before,
Yeah.
before something happens. But even if you call me after, we can
Yeah.
figure it out. But it's best if you call before. And that is what she would do.
Mm-hmm.
She kept the line of communication open. And if she
Yeah.
had questions, or if she felt like she was struggling with anything, she would call. And I was like, this is, like, she followed the instructions. Like, I cannot, like,
Yeah.
she followed the instructions. And it's from that day that the switch was flipped back, to her becoming who she, on her way to becoming who she is today. Like, I can truly say, like, we've had many of conversations, and I'm like, this is what I know works, and what helps. As you're following God, you're listening to Him, you're doing the things, but you're also keeping your community,
Mm-hmm.
and talking out what you need to talk, and not holding it in.
Yep.
And I commend you for doing that. I really
Well,
do.
thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah, you guys really preached on the accountability, and nobody likes being held accountable when you need accountability. But
Right.
we did. I mean, I remember it. We did a recovery or a relapse prevention plan. That's what it
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
was.
Mm-hmm.
And we went through all of the situations that had made me relapse in the past and how we are going to prevent it in the future. And this was one of those.
Mm-hmm.
And one of them was calling somebody and letting them know. And that's
Yeah.
what I did. And I feel like, I mean, I still call Donna and talk to her. We talked the other day.
Yeah.
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 Our calls get fewer and farther between sometimes, but
Yeah. But
we
still keep in touch, because she still, like, you still cross my mind. I still, and I just love to hear about what what's happening with you, what you're doing. I like keeping up with you.
feel like I've got like something great happening every time I talk to you.
Yeah. And so I enjoy continuing to see the journey unfold. It's a beautiful thing. So I thank you for allowing me to continue to be a part,
Of course,
of
yeah.
of your life.
Um, so yeah, like after this point, I have nothing but good stuff to say. So
Yeah.
I can
That's
just
good.
tell you all the good things that have happened since then. Um, so got full custody of my son, building a relationship with my daughter. I'm building relationships with my family. I now have keys to all of their houses, which is crazy because they had changed all their locks previously.
Yes.
I paid off that car for my aunt. She sold it to me. So I now owned my own car. When I moved back here, I ended up moving back in with my granny, was living with her for a while. I went back to school, got my associate's degree. Then I went back and got my bachelor's degree.
Good for
Um,
you.
I'm
Yeah.
finishing my master's degree in August of this year. And I've
Yes.
already applied for my doctorate degree that starts in August.
Oh, that's awesome. For what?
For counseling. So I'm going to
Counseling.
be a substance
Yeah.
abuse therapist. But my doctorate is PhD in counseling education. So
That's
I'll
awesome.
be
Yeah.
professor / therapist.
Yeah.
Um, and I got to go to a Christian university. So while I got a secular degree that's taught me everything that I need to know about therapy and counseling, I get to do it by integrating my faith into it, which is, I feel like that's
Amazing.
what God really wanted me to do.
Yes.
I have bought a house. I bought a house this year. I
Yay.
bought a new car this year.
Yeah.
And I got married no, it was 2023. I got married
Mm-hmm.
June of 2023. So life's just been
That's awesome.
nothing but
That's
good things since
beautiful.
then.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes. I mean, so that you see why I say one of the most
I
resilient
mean, you would just
stories.
never know, by
Mm-mm.
looking at you what you've gone through.
Mm-mm.
You,
Um,
it's a light. Like it like I feel like God has given me such a light in my life for as sad as I was.
Yeah.
That's the only word that I can think of to describe it, is just like a light and a love. And I just don't even think about myself as that person anymore. I was just telling Donna the other day, like, sometimes it's hard to believe that I went through some of the things that I did.
Yeah.
And while I used to, like, say that I have PTSD over some of these things that happened, I don't feel like I'm stuck on those like thoughts and remembering those things anymore.
Right.
I used to get sweaty palms every time I would drive by a certain street, and now I can drive up and down that street all the time and it doesn't even bother me.
Yeah.
But it's just not
That's,
even the same person.
Yes.
yeah.
So this coming
You
up
are
April will
new.
be 7 years.
Yes.
Okay, 7 years.
7 years.
Wow.
Yes.
So in 7 years, you got back custody.
Mm-hmm.
You're going for your doctorate degree. You're
Yep,
married. Isn't that beautiful? I
it
just love
is.
that so much. Man,
Yes.
that's just a blessing.
I start off all of my prayers with thank you for everything that you have done. Like, I
Yes.
and I can't even list all the things because there's probably stuff that I don't even know that God's done, that he's just orchestrated throughout all of
Yes.
this. But I mean, I just started off with that every single time, just like, thank you. I could not have done this. Like, the road that I chose for myself was way different than the road that I'm on now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I liked how you started off with saying that, like, it takes, like, now you have a passion. Obviously, you have a passion for, like, helping others, educating others. And so I think you wouldn't have that, develop that passion had you not gone through those experiences. Although a lot of it was painful, there's so many people that you're going to help. I mean, that you probably are, I know, already have
Mm-hmm.
helped change their lives. I just love your honesty, though. I love how honest you were about um, when with your kids and like that whole situation. It's very difficult as a mother to admit when we're being a bad parent,
Yeah.
because I went through some of those things too where I know I wasn't either.
Yeah.
And so it's freeing when you're able to share that and just know that, that's not who I am today.
Right. I'm
So,
a
Yeah.
mom that made some bad decisions, but I'm not a bad mom.
bad
Right.
mom.
Right.
And you know what? You reminded me. I skipped over some other things that have happened
Yeah.
throughout that whole process. Chris gave me hepatitis C because I was sharing needles with him, um, and I ended up being able to get a medication that was $100,000 completely paid for.
Mm-hmm.
And now I do not have hepatitis C.
Amen.
I
Good for you.
I did not get any STD, any AIDS, anything like that, even though all of my decisions should have led me to get those things.
Yeah.
So that was just, I forgot about
So,
those two things. That's
Those
two more
two
things that
yes.
things.
happened.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I mean, his protection was over you even
Yeah.
when you didn't know that you needed it.
Yeah.
That you
Mhm.
needed protection. But to like Hope was saying, it's the testament, the testimony that you have,
Man,
that's
it's
already,
powerful.
already have helped people,
Yeah.
and even it'll help even scores of more people to know that, you don't have to stay where you are.
Yeah.
You're not stuck. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Even if you
That's,
feel like you're stuck, you're not stuck. It just takes you, you making because you made a decision to, because even when they offered you help, you didn't have to take it, but
that's
you
Mhm.
right.
did. And even though going into a place, making the decision to come into a place for 9 months residential, another 3 months non-residential, uh, and graduating that, and then even staying in the place until you felt, you were ready and you could, go.
Yep.
Um, all of those things, is you could have said, no, I'm going anyway, I don't care, they, because that happens.
Yeah, all
It
the
does.
It
Yeah.
time. All the
happens
time.
all the time, and
Mhm.
Would
it's
have landed me
like,
right back in the Foundry too.
right, yeah.
Yeah.
So making the decision to trust God, that was the first major decision that you
Mhm.
made.
Yeah.
In your life, beginning to make that turnaround, and then investing in yourself, like, because the doing the Genesis process was you investing in yourself,
Yeah.
uh reading those scriptures, writing them on note card, that was you investing in yourself. And nobody else could have done that but you. You know, and so that it takes that investment. Like you have to be willing to invest in yourself, but you got to first realize, because you didn't start doing that until you realized that you were worth doing that.
Yeah.
Like the worth came back, you know, your sense of worth came back at that point. And like I said, it was a beautiful day for me to witness, to be able to witness that that next, like, because it was literally like a week, because at that point I saw people every week.
Yep.
And the next, it's like I'm sitting with a different person. And it's like, man, this is amazing. And so to continue to, you know, you're 7 years in and still rocking it out, like
Yeah.
it's just beautiful.
It
It is a
is.
Thank
beautiful,
you.
yeah, you are welcome. And thank you for coming
Of
and
course.
sharing,
Yeah.
sharing with people, because they need to know, they need to, like, people
They
need
just need
hope.
to know. People need to know that you can recover. You know, it
Yeah.
can be done.
Well,
Yeah.
I appreciate it.
what's that Bible verse that says, "Be ready at all times to share about the hope you have inside of you"?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
That's my like life motto. I am ready at the grocery store. I am ready at the gas station. Like
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'll tell anybody that I'm a recovering addict.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I do all the time. We joke around about it with my family now. Because it's been long enough. I feel like we can joke about it. But like
Yeah.
Yeah.
they tell people all the time, and I tell people all the time because I'm not embarrassed by it. Like
Yeah.
it's
Right.
part of my story, but that's not who I am now.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And that's the beautiful thing, the fact that you can share it.
Yeah.
And
Mm-hmm.
it's like, you know, hey, that stuff happened, but that's not who I am.
Yeah.
Look at who I am. You know, this is who I
Yeah.
am. And the fact that you don't have to be defined by your past. And
Mm-hmm.
that's an
Exactly.
amazing thing. And when we can get from that place, and like,
That's
yeah,
changes.
you know, I
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
tell people often, what I'm like, either I did it or I didn't. And
Yeah.
I mean, that's all I can tell you. If I did it, I'm gonna say, yeah, I did that. If I didn't, then no, I didn't do that. But here's what I did do.
Mm-hmm.
Because that's all I can do. It's nothing I can do about it. It's nothing I can do about back there. So I'm not gonna live back there. I'm moving forward. And so like when people ask me how I'm doing, I say I'm making progress.
Yeah.
And like often I get this question, I got it just the other day, when I said I'm making progress. Oh my gosh, what's wrong? I don't know, like nothing.
No, I just want to be moving
Nothing.
forward.
Yeah, I just want to, I'm like, that's just reminding myself to move forward. And I go, oh, okay. It was like nothing's wrong. I'm just gonna move forward.
Yeah. Well,
Um,
thank you guys for letting me share
yeah,
today.
you are welcome. We
Yes, thank you
appreciate
for
you.
coming on. You can come back anytime. I
Of
really
course.
Yes,
your
you
life
can.
history has touched me today. I enjoyed it. Thank you so much.
Thank you
Yes,
guys.
you are welcome. So everyone out there, whenever you see this, just share it, because it is one of the, you
Mm-hmm.
know, one of the most beautiful life histories of hope and resilience. So tune in again to see who else we may have,
Yep.
and we'll see you next time. Bye.
Bye.